notice we have two people who would, oh no, let's start with a roll call. Roll call. Sumi, would you like to begin? Roll call?
I'm Sumi Kailasapati, Ward 1 Council Member, Liaison to the Human Rights Commission. Also, Council Member Graydon Craypaul emailed me this morning to say that he would be not present today because he was out of town. So I needed to convey that message. Thank you.
Vice Chair Vivian Chang.
Mohammed Al-Azum, Commissioner.
Pamela Dent, Commissioner.
Corrine Moore, Commissioner.
Leslie Stambaugh, Commissioner and Chair.
Linda Winkler, Commissioner.
David Baum, Commissioner.
Jordan Jones, Intern.
The agenda. Do people have changes to the agenda? I have a couple. Maybe I should begin. I would like to do three things. I'd like to, under administrative issues, the second, to have this as the second point, a city contractor letter. Under also administrative issues, instead of guest presentation program, I'd like to have instead of, let's see, oh, I see. The last point on administrative issues should be cultural awareness training, and under new business, if we have time, one community. Does anybody have any other changes they'd like to make?
So I'd like to note that guest presentations is spelled incorrectly, so presentations is currently spelled presentations.
Yes.
And I think Travis Redina's role is LGBTQ Liaison to the Mayor's office.
Yes.
So it currently says LBGTQ.
I'm sorry, what is it? Oh, just LBGT.
LGBTQ. You currently have LBGTQ.
Thank you.
And I also wanted to note that I've heard a lot of conversation at police task force meetings about trespass in particular. And looking at who's in the audience, I suspect that might be some part of what public comment concerns today.
Sounds like it is, yeah.
I would wonder whether or not it would make sense to have a public comment section after or during the trespass section to encourage more dialogue so that they have some understanding of what we're talking about before they start.
Would you like that?
Yes, please.
We can do that. Thank you. So you've heard few changes. Does anybody have any other changes they'd like to make? Somebody like a motion to accept?
Motion to accept the changes as stated.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We're going to start with a guest presentation, and we're very fortunate to have Travis Redina. And I was going to ask you if you would introduce him. There's some cheat sheet notes. I was going you came in late. I was going to warn you.
Oh, thank you for that, Leslie.
Sorry.
It is
done that either.
truly my pleasure to introduce Travis Redina, who was appointed to replace former liaison Brad O'Fury, who resigned earlier this month due to work conflicts, according to the mayor's office. While Brad O'Fury continues to be an important voice, the mayor said that he was proud to announce that Travis will succeed him as the next LGBTQ liaison to the mayor's office. Redina is serving in his second year as president of the Jim Toy Community Center's Board of Directors, which is Washtenaw County's LGBTQ Resource Center. And he has served on that board for more than 4 years, or nearly 4 years. He is also the senior global engagement manager for the University of Michigan's Alumni Association chapters on the East and Western and on the East Coast and in Western and Northern Michigan, Eastern and Northern Michigan. And he works with several global affiliate groups, including the U of M LGBTQ alumni and UN Black alumni. And he has spent 5 years working in the legislative office of the former Michigan State Representative and Democratic floor leader, Kate Siegel. Or is it Siegel? Kate Siegel. All right, and later as her legislative director. So I work with Travis pretty regularly and happy to introduce him today.
Thank you for doing that. And thank you for being here, Travis.
Thank you. So when I was originally asked to come and address the commission tonight, it was actually just in my capacity as president of the Jim Troy Community Center to kind of give an update to all of you about what the center is doing and what the center does for the community. Since then, I was just toward the end of last month appointed to the position in the mayor's office, and so I do have a slide on that as well, and I'm happy to talk about that as well. But I'm going to start my presentation kind of more with my role at the Jim Troy Community Center. And so for those of you who are not familiar,
I think you should wait. Thanks.
thank you. Okay, so for those of you who are not familiar with the Jim Troy Community Center, we are Washtenaw County's LGBTQ Resource Center. Our mission is essentially that we envision an inclusive community where people of diverse sexual orientation and gender identity are visible and live together in equality, respect, and happiness. In order to achieve that mission, we provide a physical meeting space for about 15 different community groups. All of them have an LGBTQ focus. That number varies somewhat throughout the year, but on average it's about 15 different groups, everything from an LGBTQ AA group to book clubs, support groups. Out Loud Chorus meets there. So it's a pretty diverse group, a bunch of community groups. We also have events throughout the year, and so the focus of most of our events is to build community and increase visibility for the community. I've listed a few of them there. Some of our bigger events are the Jim Toy Birthday Bash, Equality on Tap at Bill's Beer Garden. This year we're happy to partner with AFC Ann Arbor for a Pride Night coming up later this month. We participate in the 4th of July Parade. We host Arbor Pride and many other events. There is a fundraising component to a lot of the events that we do. The goal is to remain accessible, but as I mentioned, we also provide a physical space for community groups, and so we have rent, bills, things like that, and there's also often a cost to some of the things that we do. So there's usually a fundraising component. It's usually a soft ask, not a firm ticket price, because we do focus on accessibility for the community. I also kind of wanted to mention and talk a little bit about Ann Arbor Pride because it's probably the one that has the biggest impact on the city itself. This is formerly Outfest. Outfest was originated in October around National Coming Out Day, or Coming Out Month. And after several years of kind of bad weather, poor attendance, and the fact that we had a Pride picnic in Ann Arbor but did not have a Pride celebration, we've merged the Pride picnic and Outfest into what is now being formally billed as Ann Arbor Pride this year. We've moved the event into August, so we're kind of the end of Pride celebrations in Michigan, which is something that we appreciate being able to do. So everything starts actually June 1st this year with Ypsi Pride here in Washtenaw County, and we'll conclude with Ann Arbor Pride in August. And so that starts with a night at Necto for the community. Necto is a primary sponsor of the event. Then we have a big street festival in Braun Court in Carytown, and we have partnerships with the Farmers Market Carytown Association. We work with them throughout to make sure that it's helpful and not intrusive to the neighborhood. And then it ends with the Pride picnic, as I mentioned, in Wheeler Park on Sunday, and that's really more of a family-friendly focused event. You get a lot of families and children out at that one. I also would be remiss to mention, actually, if probably our most successful service that we provide, program that we provide, is actually Karina oversees the Know Your Rights Project, which is a partnership with the Outlaws at the University of Michigan, Legal Services of South Central Michigan, and volunteer attorneys. And the group really has a goal of providing free support and advice for community members who need it, and often, I think, provide a lot of referrals to local attorneys who have offered their services as well. And so there are office hours during U of M academic year, or during the U of M academic year. So we're actually at a period right now where there are not office hours happening, but you can also contact the Outlaws throughout the year if you want to set something up. I would say another strong point that we have is kind of our issue advocacy, public policy activity, and I think part of that is largely because of who the presidents of the board have been. We all have had political backgrounds, and so this comes naturally to a lot of us. In the past, we've had strong voter registration efforts and want to revitalize that as well, so that we're making sure that our community is represented at the polls. We are a nonprofit organization, so we're nonpartisan, and we don't endorse candidates or campaign on specific issues, but we do our best to do issue advocacy for the community. And so this year we'll actually be returning our LGBTQ issues-focused candidate scorecard for candidates running for public office. And then we maintain close partnerships with a lot of our local elected officials, local, state, and federal officials. Congresswoman Dingell is frequently at our events as well. And so it's nice to have kind of that relationship with our elected officials so that when issues do come up, we can contact them. And then we also partner with other organizations when possible to make change on issues. And so this actually was largely taking place before I was on the board, but the Jim Toy Community Center was strongly partnered with the National Marriage Challenge and helped to fundraise for that effort, which ultimately brought about marriage equality. And so there are things like that the Jim Toy Center has a history of doing and that we hope to continue to do when opportunities present themselves in the future. So that was a little bit, obviously not completely inclusive of everything the Jim Toy Community Center does, but a bit of an overview. I am also now, as I mentioned, the new LGBTQ liaison to the mayor. And so I just want to talk a little bit briefly about that. As I mentioned, I was just appointed a few weeks ago, and so I don't have a lot that I can share with you right now that's happening. I'm still kind of in that listen and learn phase, and I actually think that phase will largely continue for a while. I don't pretend to represent every member of the LGBTQ community, so as you know, a cisgender male that's white, I definitely do not represent our entire diverse LGBTQ community locally. And so I really am going to consider it one of my biggest missions to make sure that I'm accessible and that I'm available to listen and to learn, so that I can share those perspectives with the mayor, with the commission, with council as well. And so I hope to, in the very near future, establish monthly office hours that I can hold regularly. In all likelihood, I'll probably host them out of the Gym Toy Center. But I may also, depending on when they're happening, I may do something here or elsewhere. I just want to make sure that it's accessible and comfortable for people to attend. I also will consider it a mission of mine to maintain strong communication, not only with the mayor, but also with the Human Rights Commission. I know that you guys were central in kind of helping to develop this position, writing the job description and things like that. And so I plan to work closely with all of you to the extent that I can. I also plan to engage members, this is similar to what I just said, engage members of the city council when possible if there are issues that arise. While I will be a liaison to the mayor's office, I hope that I can share kind of the things that I'm learning from the community with others as well if there are key decisions that need to be made or initiatives that are coming up before council. And then I have an existing relationship with Sergeant Murphy with the Ann Arbor Police Department through my work with the Gym Toy Center. We've had a strong partnership with her kind of through making sure that Pride and everything runs smoothly and the security aspects there. And so I look forward to meeting with her again. I have not met with her since I've been appointed, but it's one of the first meetings that I hope to establish so that we can start a dialogue and so that I can be helpful to her as well in her efforts with the police department. And finally, I would consider it an important role for this position to kind of help residents navigate the system when there are issues that arise, and to the best of my ability, connect them with the resources, both internal and external, that may help them if they're having problems or if they feel that they were discriminated against or if there are other issues that come up, because I know that it can often be hard to figure out where you should go or what your first steps should be. And so I hope to be able to be a resource for folks. And so my contact information is up there. I welcome kind of anyone reaching out to me. I've had a couple of emails already since it was announced, but actually most of them were, one of them was actually someone from the city of Ypsilanti actually looking for resources that we might have here in Ann Arbor. So, so I think it's positive that it was advertised so broadly and that people are aware that the position has been filled again. So, I am happy to take any questions. That's all I have prepared. But yeah.
That was great. How about questions? Anybody have any questions?
So I know that a few of us met with you before you were officially announced, and talked about some of this. I'm really glad to see that starting out monthly coffee hours is one of your main goals, because I think it's important, and I think it's important to build awareness that this is a real role, and that this is a resource that the community can have. And I would just like to note that the last time when your predecessor came before this commission, he seemed to be really interested in doing a lot of work with the police and making sure that the police were well trained and that the police understood the LGBT community, and doing a lot of work like with the police, not separately from the police, but having meetings with the police and having police at everything he did. And like, I know that you understand like the historical distress of police and the queer community. And I just wanted to stress that for me, I think it's important that you and Sergeant Murphy have these separate roles, that you can and should act in support of her if she has questions and if she needs that sort of support. But I would stress that I think it is really important for these two roles to be separate roles, and for you to represent the community to the mayor instead of being, you know, a voice for the police necessarily.
Oh, I agree completely. And so my goal is, of course, to set up a meeting and conversation with Sergeant Murphy to kind of hear what she's working on within the department. But I also recognize that within her role, she is still an officer within the department. And so it could probably potentially be challenging for her to, you know, continue pushing things or really be kind of a strong vocal critic of her own department. I don't know. Again, I plan to kind of learn a lot about what the issues are right now. I know that there are a few that come to mind, but I absolutely plan on being that advocate for the community to the mayor. So, yeah.
Yeah, and then a follow-up question, which will be an easier one. Is the Jim Toy Community Center planning any events in the next few weeks that members of this commission should consider attending?
Thank you, actually. I meant to bring it up when I mentioned our partnership with the National Marriage Challenge, but we are on June 24th, this Sunday, having a celebration of the marriage equality decision in Braun Court. I believe it's from 2 to 7. There's family events, as well as kind of a champagne toast. We encourage you to come out for brunch at Outbar and really just kind of have a day of celebrating in Braun Court. Yeah.
I guess I just want to say that if, speaking, I think, on behalf of all of us, if there's ever anything the Human Rights Commission can do to support you in either of your 2 roles, please don't hesitate to ask.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
I was curious if you have a sense of what kinds of issues are pressing for people, LGBT people in this community. Is there anything unique?
Yeah, so I definitely recognize one of the continuing issues that I think my predecessor wanted to work on, and that I think continues to be one of the issues is kind of the police-community relationship. And so, again, I want to set up a meeting with Sergeant Murphy and kind of hear where things are and what the historical conversations have been. But I definitely want to make sure that we're advocating for the police department to have adequate training for dealing with transgender individuals, for example, to make sure that in those police interactions that all parties are comfortable and respected. And so that's one of the big issues that I know is still out there. I do think that we are lucky to live in Ann Arbor, in a place where we do have a lot of progress that has been made with respect to other communities, but that doesn't mean that we've achieved everything we need to achieve. And so, so I think that's probably the most pressing issue for me right now. But again, as I start meeting with members of the community, I may hear otherwise. There may be other issues that kind of rise to the top. So,
Okay. Anybody else?
Well,
I'm sorry.
No. No, what the last thing you just said, I was wondering, will you be sort of keeping track in any systematic way, maybe, of the things that you hear that can then be communicated not only to the mayor, but also to us?
yeah, I'm going to talk to the mayor about kind of if there's a process already established within the city to track, constituent conversations, things like that, if there's a way to formally track it. Otherwise, I'll probably be doing it in like an Excel spreadsheet as I have conversations. But I also want to make sure that I'm very aware of kind of privacy issues as well, and I want to make
names.
Yeah, and so I want to make sure that in whatever way I'm doing it, I'm not identifying people unless they want to be. So.
Great.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Thank you for coming. I just wanted to add, one of the things that you mentioned was you expect in your role as liaison to the mayor to be a resource for members of the LGBTQ community when they have issues, when there are problems, when there are complaints. I think you probably already know this, but we do have a complaint vehicle set up. And I just wanted to reiterate that you should keep us in mind as a resource and a vehicle for some process if people do have complaints.
Absolutely. Excuse me. Absolutely. And actually, we do that kind of regularly through the Jim Toy Center already, and so I don't see much of a change happening. I think it's often that when people are, in a moment of vulnerability, they may go on and Google LGBTQ Ann Arbor or whatever it is, and whatever rises to the top is probably the first place that they reach out to. And so making sure that they're aware of the Human Rights Commission and other resources, places where they can formalize any complaint or issue that they may have. Absolutely.
Okay. We will definitely find out how we can keep better in touch with you and
Okay.
how we can coordinate our efforts.
Well, you all have my cell phone numbers, so you all have my cell phone numbers, so
We do.
feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay. Status excessive complaints. Pam.
Isn't it May minutes?
I'm sorry, May minutes, you're right. May minutes. Comments on minutes?
In the roll call, Corinne is mentioned as being both present and absent.
Well, it looks like it was partly crossed off and
Okay.
partly not, but her last name needs to be,
Yeah, and
Moved up
at
to
least
the
one point, like,
present,
she's
yeah.
without last
Yeah.
name too, so, yes.
yeah.
Anything else?
Under, I think it's section 3A, it's, they all say page 1, but it's actually the third page, and it says, please watch the meeting video online for the full discussion revolving. And that probably should be the full discussion, or I'm sorry, for the information shared by Interim Police Chief Fanis, and delete the full discussion revolving.
I'm sorry, I did not get that. I've been trying to find out where it is. Now I see it.
So it should say online for the information shared by Interim Police Chief,
Yes.
and delete full discussion revolving.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay.
Also, to the extent that we wanted our minutes to be more complex and to capture more detail, like, I wonder if it just seems that there's less detail here, especially when we had a really full conversation with the chief. Is there any reason we've gone back down to less detail with video links instead of explaining more what
I
happened?
think we were, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we were told in no uncertain terms that the minutes should basically just have the subject discussed, and if there's any action taken, but not to go into details, and that's supposed to be uniform across all commissions.
So
So we
there's no
kind of
room-
go back and forth on that, but, yeah.
Yeah. And, yeah. And in this case,
Yeah, I will note that, like, having attended multiple police task force meetings, that their meetings are far more detailed than this.
The minutes, you mean?
Yeah, their minutes are far more detailed than this.
And I don't know if they're being
They're not a
held to the
commission.
same standard
That's
as a
right.
commission.
Mhm.
I don't know.
we've really talked about this a lot. And,
But it's,
we've lost
yes,
that
it's something
argument,
we've
I think.
struggled with over the years. We used to include a lot more. And then there was the problem of editing, because the minutes didn't quite reflect what we wanted to say, so we ended up making so many changes. But finding some happy medium would be the best.
In this case, it would mean that we would be summary, the wording of the summary would be difficult, and I assume that's why she didn't. It
In
would
this
be
case.
difficult and could be misleading if we tried to quote it,
Yeah.
but I don't love this either. Anything else?
I think Councilmember Craple's name is misspelled under Gust's presentation. Or maybe it's, no, actually, I think it's correctly
Isn't it supposed to be P-O-H-L instead of P?
P-O-H-L, yes, not P-H-O-L.
Did you find a misspelling? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's on the second page.
Under 3A, guest presentation. Interim Police Chief Fanis was invited to the meeting by Councilmember
Oh,
Craple.
Craple, okay,
P-O-H-L.
Yep.
yeah. Okay. Anything else? We have a motion to,
I will note that Heather also mentioned in an email to me that attached to the minutes from this meeting will also be the annual report.
yes,
too.
yes, thank you,
And she wanted to make sure someone made that clear.
Thank you.
thank you. I will remember to attach it, and I did send it to, well, you saw that, I think.
Yeah.
Weston, I think Jordan had something to add.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jordan.
Under the agenda, discussion and approval, it says will present versus just one will. Is that reading right?
Yes, it does. Well, Chief Venice will present? I don't have
Yeah,
that.
I
It
have
was
on
crossed
mine,
out.
it's crossed
It's
out, one of the
crossed out.
wills is
Yeah.
crossed out.
Okay,
Okay.
sure.
Anything else? Motion to accept as amended?
I'll move to accept as amended. The minutes.
All in favor?
Aye.
I passed out a copy of the contractor letter that actually we had hoped had been sent out last year, and I have a feeling that it may have been my fault that it wasn't. But we would like it to be sent out this year, and what it would do would be to contact all contractors of the city to update them on the new poster, which you did approve last year, the new posters from last year, and make sure that we have correct information for them for human rights kinds of issues. So it's a pretty simple thing, but it does remind contractors who've been there a long time that this is what they signed, this is the law, and this is the way to, their employees should post the poster, and they should call us if there is any problem, or if they want more information. This is not a final. My guess is it's going to go through purchasing and legal and have a little, some change perhaps, but I wanted you to have it and to see it and make comments and maybe change it if you'd like. That's what we're expecting. The new contractors all have the new poster. It's the older contractors, probably the ones that have been there the longest who joined.
Do you want us just to just email any comments that we might
Yes, you
have?
could do that.
Okay.
That would be great, thank you. Guest presentation programs.
I thought it was status of complaints.
Excuse me?
Wasn't status of
Oh, wait.
complaints next?
Excuse me?
Status of complaints.
Status of complaints, yes. I want you to know that I just got back from
Yeah.
Houston with no sleep last night, and so I'm a little flaky. Please excuse me a little bit. Status of complaints. Pam, David, and Linda may have something, so let's start with Pam.
No, I don't have anything for you.
Kareem,
Oh, and Kareem, too. I'm sorry.
maybe.
Maybe.
And not Linda.
So
Wait, you too? Okay.
currently, we have, I believe there are 3 open complaints. One dates back to last year with respect to allegations of discrimination based on disability in a nail salon. And I have been in contact with the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, and there is a possibility that that complaint will be settled with compensation. I'm in the process of having that worked out. The other 2, one, I sent it to the 3 of us who agreed to receive them initially and make some kind of decision as to who might then act on it. And so the one that I'm referring to, Corrine actually was asked by me to assume responsibility for addressing that, and she may have additional information. And the other speaks to one that I initially was contacted by via the HRC phone, and then the person subsequently completed at my request, a complaint form along with a letter accompanying the complaint form, and I believe, Leslie, you have that information.
Yes.
So you may speak better to that. I know you were going to bring it to the commission at large. We were going to at least have some conversation about it.
Right.
There is one that I previously brought, and that spoke to an individual who contacted the commission in reference to hotels denying individuals who are at least 18 but not yet 21. And I remember stating at our last meeting, because the note said that I would contact the city attorney's office. And I recall stating that I would go back and listen to our commission meeting, so I did. And so the video of that states that Linda suggested that the city attorney's office be contacted. So I just bring that up to clarify that I did not state I would, but just that that conversation would take place, because we had a couple of concerns. Is there something within the city outside of the NDO that speaks to what hoteliers may be required to do? And then there was some discussion amongst several of us as to if the complaint itself fell within our jurisdiction, and was it actually public accommodation. So I was then directed to request of the individual who initially contacted the commission to complete a complaint form. I did do that, and we have heard nothing since. Prom season is over, so it may be a moot point, at least for this year. But I think it bears some follow-up, and I will try and contact the individual, but it's a moot issue at this point.
Okay.
So I just bring that up because I said I would, and that's the clarification.
Thank you. Corinne, how are you doing with this?
I'm fine, but with regard to the complaint that I believe
Yeah.
was referred to me, I am not sure that there's any way to speak about it on a public record without clearly identifying who that is.
Okay.
I did speak to an advocate attorney about it, and he does believe that it is a violation of federal law, and that, that process is working. I guess at this point, we can consult and reach out and follow up and advise what the next steps would be in that process.
Okay. Do you need anything from the rest of us about that one?
I will probably talk to Pam about what the regular protocol is, because I've never followed up directly on one of these complaints before, but I'll just follow up with her on what the proper procedure is as far as where we keep a record and how we keep a record and how we do follow up. So.
Okay.
I guess one question would be, for us to take back is, even, though it's also a violation of federal law, does it violate our human rights ordinance as well? And what would the penalties be under our ordinance? Because I don't know, but it likely does also violate our.
Yeah, and that, it might be worth pursuing, actually.
As well as Elliot Larson, obviously, based on the changes in the law. But, so there's a lot to do, but on our end, we should probably focus on our ordinance and the likely whatever remedies can be obtained under our
I assume
ordinance
you
in
get
addition
better.
to federal.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but it's nice to be on the map.
It might be faster if you get something from
Right.
help from us.
Or it's nice that our ordinance might get acknowledged in complaints as well, and,
That would be nice too, yeah.
potential lawsuits, right? And we're not just an empty ordinance that never gets enforced, so.
Right. Okay. Well, I've got one that does have to do with our ordinance, or I don't know that I have it, but it has come over our desk, and we do need to deal with it. And it has to do with an issue that we're very involved with, because it's not federal law and it's not state law probably. It has to do with restrooms used by people who have a gender identity that doesn't match their birth identity, and they don't pass. And it has to do with an employer who is trying to get this right and is not satisfying the complainant. So there are lots of issues, and there's also a chance to get some expert weigh in on this or some help. And I started reaching out, first of all, to somebody in Affirmations in Ferndale who has dealt with this as a consultant for other business organizations. I also thought about talking to Andre about this, because he's also a consultant who's dealt with this. But we need to get together and talk about how we want to proceed with this. I think that the expert stuff is one thing, the actual conflict with the employer is another, and they may not be the same thing. But that's where we are now. So we will be talking about this. David, did you have something?
I have nothing to add.
Okay. And Linda?
No.
Okay.
There was just one other question that I had. It doesn't speak to open complaints, but we did receive an inquiry from the spouse of individual. So our directive at that time that we received the concern was to go back to the individual. And I just wondered if we'd heard anything from that.
I've not heard a thing. But that is always a problem for us, is that we have to hear from, we have to have the complaint from the person complaining. And we did reach out and try to make that happen. Okay. Nothing else on complaints?
No, and there weren't any via the telephone, so.
Okay, good. Next, I would like us to talk about guest presentations. We decided, I think at the beginning of this whole process, when this was first brought up, that we would sign 6 organizations up and see how it went and whether it was, how useful it was, what was good about it, what was bad about it. So I'd like us to begin by talking about the pros, and then talk about the cons, and then have a discussion about, is this worth keeping? And if not, or if it is, would it be better if we made some changes in it? This is something that we decided we would do for a number of different reasons. To get to know the issues that organizations like Jim Toy Center, like NAACP, and the ones that we talk to, what organizations are they struggling with? How can we help? How can they help us? Getting to know them, building the relationship so that we can then work with them. Let's start with the strengths. What's working about with these presentations?
I've learned a lot, and I think it's important for these groups to know that we're here and we care about what they do, and we can, if they need assistance with something, they can ask us. If we get a complaint where we now know they might be able to help us, we can contact them. I think it's only positive, as long as representatives of these organizations are willing to come and do it. And we will run out of organizations at some point, but there are still many that we haven't spoken with.
A lot of them, yes.
A lot of them.
Yes, and a lot of good things going on.
So,
What else? Vivian, you were the one who asked for this discussion specifically at this point, and I think this is a good time to have it. Do you have any pros about what we've heard in the 6 presentations that we've, not the individual ones, but overall, has it been valuable in any way?
I don't think so. I'll speak later as to the cons.
I'm sorry.
I'll speak later as to the cons.
Okay. Okay.
is there any way that you think it could be improved?
Yes, I think there are many ways,
And
but I
still
do.
inviting these organizations?
Yes, if the majority decides that we should still have these, we should still continue with this, I think there are a number of things that we need to look at and that can be approved. But
Okay.
given that time is limited and we only meet once a month, I've raised the option of holding cultural awareness training using the same time instead. And I think those are competing objectives because we don't have an unlimited amount of time to work with.
I separated the cultural awareness training on here because I I don't see that as something that can be done, that it's an either or. I can't imagine doing it 20 minutes at a time, for example, and that's about what we take for this. So I don't see it as necessarily part of this question. So I don't
It's
know.
also a little hard to have this conversation now, since this idea was raised by Rick to begin with, and
That's
he's
right.
not here now
That's
to
right.
discuss it. So I'd hate to make any final decisions
Right.
without having him here, but it's still good to have a conversation.
Yeah. So we were talking about pros. Is there anything else that you think might be an advantage to doing what we've done so far?
I think from my limited experience, in the commission here, and the list of the organization which we could, listen to, especially about their, concern of the human right and, civil right in Ann Arbor. Some of those organizations which I'm kind of familiar with, I thought they could help us a lot understand the issue of certain part of the community which we are not very familiar with, For example, the CARE of Michigan, I think I mentioned in my email to you, Leslie, I'm quite familiar with them. I think some of us in the commission here can learn something from this, whatever 15, 20-minute presentation, and we could initiate a communication avenue with this organization to help certain part of the community which not very familiar with their issue, So I think, yeah, it is an educational process for us, I think some of the point that the people who's watching the program, on TV and they are not going to learn anything out of that 20-minute presentation or whatever, which I agree with, But for us as a commissioner in this committee, we could learn something to improve our role in, serving the community and helping those people who doesn't have a voice, to reach out, and contact us,
I also like the fact that it helps us begin a relationship, and we've been building on that in that we're sending events more often, newsletters, and we know where to go when we need something as well. So that, and I think the relationship is very important.
I'll also add that another benefit is that besides the opportunity for us to learn more about relevant organizations, at least relevant in terms of our mission in the community, by virtue of the fact that there are some people who pay attention to what we do out in the community, this becomes another forum for the larger community to learn about these organizations. So to the extent that people read our minutes, or to the extent that people go online and watch our meetings, they might be learning about organizations that they didn't know existed either. So I guess I would just summarize that by saying, there's more than just us as the audience that these are potentially useful for.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. How about cons?
Before you get to that, just one comment that I had, and that is, I know that Rick spearheaded the effort to invite the individuals with our input as well. And one of the things that I was thinking, one, I am in agreement with the comments that have been made and concur wholeheartedly. But one of the other ways that I thought that we might perhaps expand the awareness is to ensure that that information gets placed on our Facebook page, so that we have some heads up that these individuals are going to be presenting rather than the day of. So that if there are individuals who may want to come and be a part of the listening audience as opposed to viewing it subsequently, then they would at least have that information, and we can serve in some respects as notifying the public that we're going to have these presentations made at our monthly meeting.
Do you mean on the city's Facebook
Twitter?
page?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any venue that we are currently notifying the public, as we do with events, for example, when we at the listening sessions, for example, with Hillard Hines, we publish that to the masses. So I'm saying apply that same principle for any of the subsequent groups or invitations that we extend so that the public is aware prior to and can make the decision to join us at the time of and perhaps address any concerns or questions that they may have, rather than it be just ourselves who are questioning or asking questions.
Okay, good. Anything else in the pros before we go to the cons? Or the things that don't work quite as well? Okay, how about those?
So I think I've already shared some of my thought process over email, but I just wanted to note that to the extent that I think that there are several questions we have to confront right now. The first being who the audience is. Is this primarily for our benefit, for the benefit of the organizations we're speaking to before us, or the benefit of the community? I've heard several people mention, Mohammed and Rick included, that they think primarily the benefit is for us because people don't really watch. There isn't a large viewership. There's a large potential viewership out there, but maybe the viewership isn't big, and the people who are primarily benefiting are us, and that's what Rick said in his email, that we are the primary benefactors from this program. If that's the case, I have some questions about what the goal of this is. Because if the goal is to educate us about human rights issues that we are not currently aware of, I wonder whether or not the selection method we have is the ideal one, because we are already selecting amongst organizations that we are aware of and that we have relationships with and that we know of. If we're truly interested in hearing the voices of those who are voiceless, of those who don't have any means of reaching out to us, I also question whether or not those communities have organized into groups like this as well. Like, is there an undocumented restaurant workers group? There isn't. Those are important communities. Is there a community group for transgender or non-binary or genderqueer individuals? There isn't currently. That's an important group that we should be serving. There aren't very many Asian advocacy groups in the city of Ann Arbor, despite the fact that Asian Americans are the largest minority group in Ann Arbor. So to the extent that we're looking to give voice to those who are voiceless, I'm not sure that going for large organized groups is the best means of accomplishing that. Furthermore, I think that, if the goal is also to educate us and make us aware of what's going on in the community and to help us better serve people in marginalized communities, I feel like it might be a good idea to take things back to the basics and engage in cultural awareness training that help us with things like terminology, with ways of engaging with the community or what issues those communities are facing in a very basic way, instead of talking about issue advocacy organizations, for example, who are already committed to certain issues, instead of perhaps broadly focusing on what's confronting the communities that they serve and what's most important to those communities. Another issue I have with the current method is that, to the extent that we're doing this to ask how these organizations can help us and how we can help them, I'm not sure that that's being made explicit to them. And a lot of these organizational meetings that we've had, they've given us biographic information that we could access through their website or their Facebook pages, introductory information. I'm not sure that we're explicitly asking them, are you aware of the Human Rights Commission? Are you aware of what we do? How can the Human Rights Commission help your constituency? What can we give you and what can you give us? How can we foster a long-term relationship moving forward? I've been in contact with one of the presenters afterwards because we're coworkers, and there has been no follow-up from the Human Rights Commission. I don't think one 20-minute presentation, a long-term, by itself, forms a long-term relationship. If the goal is to make long-term relationships with these organizations, I think we should be following up, and we haven't. to the extent that we do already have long-term relationships with some of the organizations that have come and spoken to us, I think it's because individuals on the Human Rights Commission have relationships with these organizations, not that the Human Rights Commission as a whole has a relationship with these organizations. And to the extent that we think that these group presentations are useful and serve a need, I think we need to think about tailoring the process a little bit more to actually accomplish any of these stated goals. Because I don't know now if they currently do.
I like the idea of having a set of questions, which I think we sort of get at each time, that we're very careful that we ask each organization to try to get at some of the things that some of the ones that you just asked about, what we can do for you, that kind of stuff. And make sure we ask it each time and write them down, keep a record. And the follow-up part is great, but we are, everybody has jobs. We have no, it's like one more thing when I worry that what we really need to do is make sure we handle these complaints and make sure we don't let the real basic fundamental things that we need to do go by the wayside.
And I think that these are basic fundamental things. Like currently, for example, I think that, everyone on this commission should know more about, say, like basic terminology for LGBTQ.
Well, that's another question, the cultural competency, but I'm just talking about the organizations and following up with organizations. That
but
part.
This, if our stated goal is to form lasting relationships, I think it's naive to assume that asking them to present to us one time makes it a relationship with nothing else. Because that just means we've asked them to do a favor for us one time. That doesn't start a relationship. That doesn't really begin anything if there is never any follow-up. Yes, we're all busy, but if we do nothing with that, if we don't follow up, then I don't see the point of just having that.
I'm not sure what the follow-up would look like. If we don't have a particular issue that we need to actually, because they're busy too, right?
Sure, and if that's the case, then what sort of relationship is that? Is that an important one to be starting, if that relationship?
I think it's important for them to know that we're here, that we care that they're here, and that
we care that they're here, but we don't care to do anything with that?
That I think we do. As we get complaints, we call these organizations. We do.
But all these organizations.
When Leslie coordinates the response group, when there's a hate issue, she already knows these people. They've been here. She can call them. I mean, it's a sort of more organic thing that happens over time, I think. If you can think of some way to have a follow-up that makes sense and can be done in a way that will get us something, then that's great. I'm just not sure what it was.
I think that's a really transactional view of building relationships that doesn't actually work towards like actual coalition building. That just says like, look, we've invited you, we respect you as an organization, you're on our list, now we're done. And then 3 years later, we might call you. These are all organizations we were already aware of. This is why they're on this list, because we already know about them. We already knew that they existed and what they basically do. If that's all that's going to happen, that they're going on the list that we can potentially call up if something happens in the future, we can already do that without having these presentations. What do these presentations add to that? Is my question.
Okay. Other thoughts?
Well, I think some of what we've already expressed in terms of awareness, getting the information out to the public, with our meetings being publicized, we are serving an important role in being the facilitator for that, in terms of communicating the information to the general public. I would disagree with you that we already know these organizations, because there are many that are listed that we have subsequently listed that I'm unaware of. There are some that I've heard of, but I learned more when the individual representatives came and presented than I would have known otherwise. I'm not opposed to fostering a more cohesiveness, I guess, in terms of partnership with the organizations or interacting with them in a more viable approach, but I guess I'm unclear as to just what that would mean outside of what we already do or may do individually. You're correct that some of us know of these organizations on an individual basis, but I'm puzzled or confused, I guess, as to what your expectation may be for the commission as a whole in interacting with the organizations that we invite to speak to us, share their information. I can say that for the one that I was probably most familiar with, Fair Housing, that presented, we have an existing potential where we can partner with them, and that would serve as additional interaction with that organization. There are others of us on the commission who also have interactions with Fair Housing, either as members of the organization through dues or participation in the events that they have. I personally attended a workshop that they sponsored last year, which resulted in me establishing a relationship with another participant that I see now is on the list that we would consider inviting. But I guess I'm still confused as to if you want more than just the presentation, what your expectation is of the commission as opposed to an individual. The relationship that I think I hear you saying that you want the commission to have with these organizations other than or outside of them just presenting. So I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying I'm not clear as to what it is that you're asking.
I think that currently in the model that we have, we're just asking labor from them. We're not necessarily offering any back. We're just asking time and energy from the presenters, and it's not equivalent relationship. Like in nonprofit world, like this isn't how coalition building happens. Just saying something like, "Oh, we're such good partners," and this, for example, happened a lot to me as like a student in Boston and dealing with a lot of LGBTQ organizations. Like they would say like, "Oh, like we partner with all these organizations." I'm like, "Okay, so are you coalition building? Are you also partnering with POC organizations? Are you also showing that you're being actively anti-racist?" And they're like, "Oh, no, we don't actually know those people." And like, yeah, we know some organizations, but we don't actually do anything to show that we're actively anti-racist. And I think that's bad coalition building. And I think that, a healthier, more productive relationship would be like having, the human, this is something we've discussed at these meetings before, potentially having the Human Rights Commission go to some of their meetings and talk to their constituencies about what we do. Because right now, I don't know that we know that they're bringing that information necessarily back to their constituencies or explaining to them what's being done and that the HRC is a resource. I don't know if they see this as, a one-way street or a two-way street. Are they merely educating us, or is this something where they can take something meaningful and useful and important back to their membership? Like, for example, we talked to Travis just now in his capacity as LGBTQ liaison. He says, I work with the Jim Toy Community Center. We already refer people, we're well aware of the HRC. We know about the complaint process, and that's something that we already do. And like, if that's something that they already do, like we're not educating them or their constituency on who we are because they already knew that. And I would like to see us do things like for Juneteenth, like volunteer or be present in our aspect as the Human Rights Commission, or for the Day of Decision meeting, doing something similar along those lines, and showing that the Human Rights Commission does care about human rights issues in our individual and our organizational capacity, and be present at events like that, or at like the local, or at the local powwow that's like set up at Skyline, having information, being present in the community in a visible way, I think is a way of making meaningful relationships that doesn't just require labor from someone else, that goes in one direction.
Well, I think to respond to that, we do, in some respects, those of us who have personal relationships with individuals in those organizations. So I'm still a little confused about the extent that you want the commission to be involved when there are individuals on the commission who have those partnerships with those organizations.
And that's part of my concern, because if we're inviting to speak those organizations that we individually have relationships with, Like, we have also already clearly spoken to those organizations and brought acknowledgement and awareness of the HRC to those organizations. Are they really learning anything from that experience, given the past individual relationship? What are they learning? What are they gaining from this, given that I already know Organization A, and they already know that I'm on the Human Rights Commission and what we do? If that's the case, what are they learning? What are they getting out of this? What are they getting out of this other than the sense that I, as perhaps the token whoever on the Human Rights Commission, have a personal relationship with this organization? But for people who are not potentially in that group on the Human Rights Commission, are they getting the sense that everyone else cares and is also invested in the goal of that organization and that organization's stated goals and what they do as well? Or is it really just a relationship with one person from that community?
Let me suggest something. First of all, a 20-minute presentation isn't going to give you very much. We're not building a coalition in that. We're not, if we say too much about a Human Rights Commission, we're going to be repetitive every time, and no one's going to want to hear that. But there are ways we can get the kinds of things that you're talking about, and I think that we do want stronger relationships. We are trying to build coalitions. The one thing that Linda mentioned was that we will want these people to be part of the community response group, and this is a way we've now made enough of a connection that we can invite them. We've only done 6 of these. This has only been 6 months old. One thing we could do is sort of survey them about their experience with us and what they would have wanted more than what we've got. We also could, and that may be, when I say survey, in that case, maybe just a phone call. You know, we've now hit a breaking point. What was your experience? What benefits did it have for you? Was it a waste of time, or what would you have liked to have done more? We could also start surveying the people that we talk about issues and get them. I mean, we could get a very interesting, very important database and find out what the key issues are for a number of people, because we've made the connection, and it's not an individual connection. I mean, I think basically we all have connections, but this is where we need a HRC connection. We could also, and so I don't think we do this, although I actually do think that Rick sends them things like our poster and our flyer. And I think he does give them an overview of the Human Rights Commission. But we could ask them in that maybe a telephone conversation, what more do you want to know about us? We'd be happy to share as well. Thank you for sharing with us. So we have to keep building on that relationship, solidifying that relationship. This is just a beginning, but is it worth it to be?
So if it is just the beginning, I think it makes more sense if we consider it as just the beginning to a longer process.
Absolutely.
If this is all we do, I don't think it's worth it.
Mm-hmm.
But to the extent that this is worthwhile at all, I think that we need to follow up on these relationships instead of it being a one and done.
So what would you suggest as a follow-up?
I think that we should, for example, follow up with the 4 organizations, I think. It is, since I think 2 months of this year we didn't have presentations. To follow up with those organizations and say, like, perhaps, like, is there a way for us to speak to who you serve, right? Like, how is your, what did you learn about us? What ways do you think the HRC could benefit the people that you serve? Not just, like, are you aware of our complaint process? Great, but, like, what specifically do you think we could be doing? Because we're more than just a complaint process. We're more than just a complaint intake form. We can do greater, we can do things beyond that too. We can take up projects. We took up the police task force, the police oversight project, and that was quite larger and more involved than just doing complaint intake. Or asking, you know, what major concerns do you have? What do you think are the major human rights concerns that are present in your community? What do you wish people outside of your community knew about the community you serve? Questions like that, and then see if we could also present to them and at least start that feedback process. Like, what did they think was good about this? What did they think was useful? What were they expecting to see? And what maybe would they have wanted to see? And do they think there would be a benefit for them to ever come back again and give like an update? or anything like that. But on a more, sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, because I do feel that that information would be valuable, I'm happy to put in the footwork or make those phone calls and compile that information.
That would be lovely.
Yeah. Well, and I also, too, have every intention on going to the Juneteenth celebration this weekend. And then, of course, we've just come to know about what the Jim Toy Center is putting on, and I'd like to go to that as well. So, you know, I know that all of you probably have more pressing time commitments than I may. So to be the face of that at those events, I'm more than happy to do if it satisfies you, Commission.
We do have a need of volunteers for the day of decision, so thank you for your binding commitment, Jordan.
Yes.
We will follow up with you directly.
That would be very good.
I can just maybe add one thing to the discussion to give you an example to what I am talking about, the voiceless people in our own community. You know, Ann Arbor in the last 3 years, 4 years, it took a lot of refugees from Syria, where I'm, you know, originally from. And those people, they are living with us here in the community for the last 3, 4 years at least, you know. And no organization represents those. For example, CARE is the only, you know, kind of Muslim organization in Michigan who can take some of these cases, you know. My work with CARE as, you know, board member for 10, 12 years, this is good 15, 20 years ago, I know for sure that none of those people in CARE, they know about the Human Rights Commission in Ann Arbor, or at least before I joined you, you know, 3, 4 months ago, I never knew that you exist, really. And I live here in Ann Arbor for 30 years, you know. To take care of those refugees, for example, who they have no voice at all, no, they don't know how to approach, you know, if there is any human rights abusement, you know, to them, they have no access, you know. CARE could represent them, you know. The newly immigrant people who lived in Ann Arbor maybe for 5, 10 years, majority of them, they are kind of less educated, less connected people. So they are voiceless people too. They need organization to represent them. So if we as commission here have some relation with organization like CARE, with Jewish Family Services, or with, you know, MCA, Muslim Community Association of Ann Arbor, we could benefit them from what we do, just to know that we exist, you know.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of benefit. I agree with you 100% that if needed, we should follow up to this presentation, not to be 20-minute shot and that's it, you know. But the minute, you know, we meet the people, their representation, he gave us his cell phone, he gave us his, you know, email, we can communicate with him if we know that there is a problem.
Yeah.
So I guess, like, what I'm hearing from you is that there might be a gap between this vulnerable Syrian refugee population and, say, CARE. It's really great that CARE exists and can address some of these problems, but what I'm hearing you saying is that there is somewhat of a gap, that some people in the refugee community, especially those who aren't, like, educated about CARE or, like, aware that CARE exists, are not being served by CARE, and that CARE isn't is a Muslim organization, but not necessarily specifically a Syrian refugee organization, for example. And so there is that gap, and it's that gap that I'm concerned by, because it's nice when people are in a place where they can organize and they can come up with like groups, like important groups like CARE, that can address some of the problems. But I'm also worried that we're not reaching those communities that don't have the means to organize and form CAREs of their own, and that if you haven't organized and haven't gotten to that level, and there is no one to speak for you, then we're not hearing from you at all, and you've fallen in the cracks entirely. if you're not currently represented by a major organization. And that takes funding, that takes community, takes community connections and support. And if we're relying on some of these like nonprofits to direct where our attention is, we might not be listening to the people who might need us the most. And that's where my concern is, and that's also one of the reasons I'm interested in the idea of cultural awareness and cultural competency training, because I think it's really important what the Jim Toy Community Center does, but I think that in these 20 minutes where they tell us what they do, they're telling us that they do like activism with the transgender community, but they're not telling us things, basic things that we should all know about, like gender neutral pronouns, about the difference between like someone who's non-binary or genderqueer or transgender, the way that like, you know, you should use transgender and not transgendered, like what the pronouns ze and here mean, like that we can use they in a singular way, and like what the acronyms AFAB or AMAB might mean. We're not engaging on the basic level of like what's going on, and I think that, you know, terminology is important too, to the extent that we're teaching the community about things. Like for example, when CARE, like if we invited CARE to come in, I don't know that they would really be giving us like a basic here's Muslim 101 terminology. But I think some people, it would be helpful to some people. Like right now, do people know right now that it's Ramadan? Do they know what suhoor and like iftar are, and why those things are important, and what that means, and why they might see like groups of people in restaurants after sunset right now? Like, I don't know that CARE is going to come in and say those things, because those are 101 level things, but I think that in order to engage in groups, with groups like CARE, we need to talk about the basic fundamental building blocks first, and make sure that we're all on the same level where we can meaningfully engage with other people about what's going on, about what matters to their community, like what language they use to identify themselves, and how they speak about themselves.
David, you've got an interesting look on your face.
Yeah, so what I'll say is I really think, Vivian, that this is a both-and situation. I think that I completely agree that it would be useful to have some cultural competency education. I don't know, I don't think that we have to do that, and Leslie was saying this earlier, instead of these presentations. And indeed, I would, if we were going to begin to think about how we would go about doing cultural competency, it wouldn't be in 20-minute increments at the beginning of a meeting. I'm guessing you'd agree with that too. You know, maybe we would do a separate retreat or something like that, where we could take a deep dive into learning about terminology with respect to different communities. But I think that, you know, the initial contact by having people come to our meetings and provide basic information, give us some basic information about what they're doing, what their organization is about. We've talked about multiple audiences. I've heard you say that, yeah, generally it's mostly us, because, you know, who knows how many people watch it, but, you know, it's out there. And I actually think some of the points you were making about making sure they understand that we're here to help. We could do that by, as Linda suggested, being more structured during these 20 minutes. Maybe in our invitation letter we say, for example, we'd like you to give us an overview of your organization, and we'd like you to think about what it is that you think that the Human Rights Commission can do for you. So that could be, you know, that could be part of it. And then, of course, you know, following up makes sense. I don't disagree with any of that, but I guess what, you know, for my part, I'm not hearing that these presentations are really devoid of value, or have so, you're not saying they're devoid of value, but they have so little value, you know, that they're not worth it to begin to build the coalition, to begin to open the lines of communications. I went last year, for example, to the Fair Housing Center's annual meeting, and it was great, and I was able to report back. I agree with you that it would be great if individuals, if maybe we could come up with a way for being more systematic about those sorts of things. I think that's a nice idea, and maybe we could figure out ways to do that. In terms of the people whose voices you're worried we're not hearing, I understand that. I think that one point I would make is that by inviting a wide range of organizations to come talk to us, what I think we all know is that there's a lot of intersectionality out there. So for example, the Fair Housing Center is going to serve a wide variety of sub-communities in this area, including perhaps people who are more marginalized. And so I think that actually some of those people could be reached by our partnerships, our affiliation, our communications with them. That's not to say we shouldn't continue to look for other ways to reach out to and make sure we understand about more marginalized communities who have less of a voice. But just because they don't have more of a voice organization, they don't have enough organization to have a voice in this way, to me, that's not a reason for not inviting these other organizations that do, right? So nothing I've heard really convinces me that, this is either or. I think you've made some great suggestions about how to improve them, but for my part, I'd like to see them continue, perhaps with some refinements along the lines we've been discussing.
Okay. I think that makes sense, but also noting the time and that we do have people in the community who wanted to discuss trespass.
Right.
I would suggest, since we already said at the beginning of this conversation that we don't want to make a decision without Rick being here, I would suggest that we table this conversation for now and come back to it later and have this just be the beginning of a broader conversation.
Sounds good, and if somehow Jordan could get to the 6 people who came and find out just what their experiences is, I think that would enrich our conversation as we bring it up the next time.
Now, is that something we'd want to start a thread in terms of the line of questioning that you would like me to ask?
I think that would make sense,
Yeah.
like an email chain, yeah.
Right, just to satisfy everybody's thoughts about that, and then I'd be happy to make those phone calls. Yeah, of course.
So would it help if we send you questions?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay,
definitely.
I think we can do that. Great, thank you. Good conversation. The next thing was cultural awareness training, and I think that, huh?
I think we talked about that.
I think we've
Yeah,
talked
I think
about
we've
it,
discussed
but
that.
I also think we have to come back to it
Yes.
as well. And I'd like some ideas about ideas about who might present this to us, because I can't believe that any of us are saying, no, that's not valuable. I think everybody always wants to know more. The other thing I heard from you, and I think is something we ought to think about, keep in the back of our heads, is one of our missions is to educate the public. And we have the ability with the relationships that we're forming. We have the ability to do it without them, but it would even be better to do it with them. Maybe we're starting to talk about a little conference about these groups in human rights in Ann Arbor, and allow these groups to present or have poster boards up or do something to say, this is awesome, this is what we do, and let the community see this. So it's another way to think about it. Can we move on to trespass? Okay. The 2 people who wanted to speak about trespass, I don't know, is that,
I think maybe it might make sense for...
would you like to speak first
Or after?
about trespass? Or do you want to hear what we are thinking?
Or should we give like a brief...
Speak midway, only because I have a little bit of background on what you all have been discussing, but you help me get caught up.
Yeah, would it make sense to do like a brief introduction? Or
I'm not sure. I didn't expect anybody to want to talk about it because we haven't done anything yet.
Yeah, in order to tie this in a little bit to the police task force update, which I know we've been meaning to get to for a few months.
Yes.
But just haven't had time to.
Right.
I know, unfortunately, Dwight isn't here because he's actually on the police task force, and I think they do a lot more than just attend these meetings. So unfortunately, as just a member of the community, I'm unable to speak to any of that. I have attended a majority of these police task force meetings, though, And I know that at some point, like trespass, for example, was raised as an issue that concerned members of the community and that they did want the task force and the eventual oversight panel to discuss. But then what I heard from some of the task force members is that they didn't necessarily know if that was something that the task force should be considering and didn't know if the oversight panel necessarily would be considering too. So I think what that raised for me was a question of whether or not there's a gap between what we think is the Human Rights Commission jurisdiction and what the task force thinks the oversight panel jurisdiction will be, and whether or not we just all think that the other person is going to deal with trespass.
Well, I don't think the task force is
Yeah, but I don't know if the
involved in
task
this.
force is necessarily.
It's the policing board.
Yes, I know, but I don't know that the task force is really thinking that the policing board or the oversight panel is going to necessarily like be addressing trespass either. Because I know that we had talked in email that like maybe we're taking the first cut at editing trespass form and providing insight to the police department about what we would like to see edited, and then maybe the oversight panel might take that up when they're up and running. But I don't know that other people are aware that we have those expectations. And so that might be, like, if we're just making a first run at things and hoping someone else would take over it later, I think that should actually be communicated to someone at some point.
The police oversight board doesn't exist yet, right? And so they have to craft it. But I can't see how it wouldn't fall within the jurisdiction of any police board, even if it's advisory, which I hope it isn't, to deal with any kind of enforcement of any kind of police action in the city, which this is, reading trespass.
And if that's the case, I wonder what's the point of us taking this first cut at it? Because
Because it's going to be a long time, and the city officials are willing to make changes now.
I know, but as I've previously stated too, I think we're all just asking questions and coming up with suggestions based on what we think is wrong with the trespass form. And I think while we might have identified a few big questions people aren't necessarily going to have with the trespass form, we haven't talked to Kaim's family. We haven't talked to anyone who actually has been read trespass.
Right.
We haven't done any of that sort of work to say, like, so you've actually been read trespass. Like, what could have improved the situation? Like, what was actually wrong with it? Are we identifying the right things that would have made this a better experience for you? Without having done that, I worry that we will do more harm in this first cut without that sort of education, without that sort of knowledge behind us, than if we left it for a body that had that time and capacity and interest to do that.
Do you think that any of the changes that you've seen the proposed changes, do you think any of these proposed changes would actually be harmful?
I think that we don't know enough, right? I think that
By adding an appeal process and by including language saying that if you feel like this is being done for discriminatory reasons, you can call the Human Rights Commission, and by maybe lowering the duration of the trespass to less than a year, I don't see how any of that can be harmful. I agree that people might think that, oh, well, we've already addressed that issue, so we don't have to address it again. In that way, it might be a problem. But I just...
So, for example, to give a brief overview of what Interim Police Chief Fanis discussed when he was here last, members of the community, on the trespass form that the police give to individuals who are read trespass, it just says that when you're read trespass, you're barred from coming back to that place for a year. Yeah. And then we asked, like, where did that year come from? Like, what does that mean?
Right.
Like, why is that one time? And he said that the courts had informed them that a year was the maximum amount of time that you could be barred for trespass. And then the question was posed, like, if that's the maximum, right? Like, why isn't this a blank space for the time of the property owner's choice to be written in? And the answer was that they're worried about discretion, about giving discretion to people, and about being discriminatory, so they set everything at the max. And so that was, that's obviously somewhat troubling to us, but I don't know that the answer is necessarily setting it at a lower max, because setting everything down is still arbitrary.
That's the tricky one. The duration thing is the tricky one, but the other one's the right of appeal.
I know, but that is tricky, and so I don't know that like we had anything meaningful to say about that without polling people and talking to people.
I think Trespass is pretty complicated, but it certainly has to do with some human rights issues. And the present law that is a state law that is the basis of the trespass, we're not in a position to change, but we can change the form. And we can change the form to, in some ways, for me, that seemed like a logical first step, and that is the human rights part. There are also parts having to do with police procedure, police training, that I think are more likely to be things that the policing board would deal with.
But I think that going forward, without having talked to people, that this is something that I've heard a lot at these police task force meetings too, that the community wants more accountability from its government. And I think for us to take on the trespass form because we were troubled by the Blake Transit incident without ever having first contacted Kaim's family would do a disservice to that goal, to the goal of transparency. And it would be perhaps somewhat patronizing for us to say, like, we know exactly what's wrong with this form and what you would have liked without ever having spoken to you. And I think that, like, discretion.
There are something like 300 people who've been read trespass in Ann Arbor this year. So,
Yeah, I know. And so because of that, like, I
Right.
think we should be talking to some people. And so that number doesn't mean like, oh, because there's 300 of them, we should talk to none
I'm
of
just
them.
saying it's not just one. But
Yeah.
see, there's no reason why you couldn't call this person and get information and feed it back to us. I mean, there's
I know,
no reason why you can't
and
do
we
that.
discussed the idea of inviting Kaim's family to come and talk to us. And I think Leslie said that she disfavored that for now. And me and Dwight said that we would like to invite Kaim's family to speak to us about trespass before we progress. I think that discretion and penalties are really hard to deal with, and that in the criminal context, you see that with sentencing and sentencing guidelines, right? There are competing notions of what's more fair to people. Is it more fair to have everything set across the board so that judges and prosecutors can't let their own racial biases enter things, and so that they're set to this mandatory sentence, so a racist judge, for example, can't give a black defendant a higher sentence than a white defendant. So that's one way of thinking, but the other way of thinking is that like discretion is important, that we can have guidelines. We can have, objective guidelines that score things higher or score things lower, and taking discretion away from people doesn't help because it reduces everything to a flat scale, and that we could consider like guidelines like, was this the first trespass warning? Was this, maybe if this was the 10th trespass warning at the same location, maybe that's a reason to, move the time up more than if it was the first trespass violation. There are a lot of competing, principles there about how discretion should be managed, and I think that by just identifying a problem and offering no solution, that we're maybe not being super helpful.
No, we're thinking about a solution, and that one is a particularly troubling one because we don't want to increase the discretion that can also be discriminatory. So the best thing that this changing form would do would be to make clear what the appeal process is, because that's where people are going to get the best outcome from. The quickest and best outcome from changes in the form.
I don't necessarily know that's true because, say for example, I'm a restaurant and your appellate rights are with me, the restaurant owner. If I am racist and I'm good at hiding it, I'm just going to say, I'm going to say to one group of people, oh no, it stays at a year, there's no appellate rights. But I'll say to another group of people, that's fine, my head waiter overreacted, let's bring it down, you're welcome back in.
It's a possibility, but what we say is, if you think this is discriminatory, you need to come to the Human Rights Commission.
That would be
Nothing
added
in
to
that
the
form says that now. Nothing on the form makes that clear what is discriminatory.
But I think I think that some things are easy fixes, but I do think that given the increased demand for transparency and community involvement, that I think we shouldn't move forward without first interacting with the community and asking them questions about what they think is wrong with the process. None of us have ever been read trespass.
But
I
you're
believe.
talking about the whole process. We're talking about just this slice.
Yes, and I think that we need to engage in that process before just barreling forward, even on that one slice.
I'm concerned about it because it seems to me we could make a big difference pretty easily, but if we take the whole thing and deal with trespass as a whole, first of all, we're going to be redundant, and secondly, I'm not sure it's going to be considered, all of it is not, we're not the people who would be best at this. We don't have the information.
If we're not the people who would be best at it, why are we
The
even?
policing board will have that information.
If we recognize that we aren't the people who will be best at it, why are we doing what we know is a mediocre job at it?
We're doing if we do the form can be changed, but you're a year ahead.
I just don't think that that matches anything that I've heard at any of these police task force meetings about what the public wants.
So I'd like to make a suggestion.
Yeah.
I agree that I don't think that we're in a position necessarily to take a deep dive into this, and I'm not sure that we should, given, the imminent creation, imminent several months down the road of the Community Policing Commission, whatever it's going to be called. I think that one thing we could do that would be a contribution, it wouldn't necessarily, resolve the problem right now. Jordan, please pardon my back. I realize that I've been turned the other way the whole time. We're thoughtful people. We have heard some issues arise around this because of Blake. We have been addressed by the interim chief of police. I don't think it would be, let me put this in the positive. I think it might be an acceptable, appropriate thing to write a letter, to put together a letter saying, from our perspective, here are the issues we discussed. Here are some suggestions. We present it to the task force to pass along to the commission, or we wait for the commission to be formed and just say, we hope you will take up this issue because we view it as an important one, and here are some preliminary thoughts that we expect you will take or leave as you see fit after you've looked into the issue thoroughly. That might be one approach rather than trying to change the form now, especially if we think that once the form is changed now, the police department might be skeptical about changing it again so soon again, within the next year or so, whenever the commission were to take it up.
That's exactly what I'm concerned with.
So that's one reason, but at least we can have some voice based on, at least our preliminary thinking about it. I agree we're not experts, but certainly the fact that, as Linda points out, for example, that there's nothing on the form that talks about what to do if you think you've been discriminated against in the reading of trespass or the application of trespass. The Human Rights Commission is a place to go. That's certainly something I think we are well within our purview to recommend for somebody to include, on the form. So that's just some of my thoughts about it at this point.
I would agree that at minimum that we add language referring people to the HRC if they think there's discrimination. At minimum, I think that we do have to be clear with the police department or whoever's working with us right now on altering this language that this is the beginning of a conversation, that we think that this needs to be delved into more deeply, and that these are just initial remedies or remedy, depending on how much we decide to do at this stage, but that we should not let it go, that we should definitely send our recommendations. If we can, I would like to hear from people who have been impacted and actually read trespass. I think that would be nice for us to write up a report with some recommendations based on what we've heard, with an understanding that we cannot know enough at this point. But I do think that we would like referrals, or for people to know that they can at least complain to us if they felt that something was discriminatory. Because right now we know that we're not going to get that any other way.
Yeah. So what is our next step?
So are you,
Okay.
okay, I know.
Okay, yeah, that's a good.
Great. First, I want to acknowledge Sumi. I've seen you 3 times this week. I bet you're really tired of these meetings. I really appreciate your attendance.
Can I interrupt you and ask a favor? Can you say who you are?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
My name is Amber. I'm a community organizer. I live in the 48108 zip code.
Thank you.
So I'm here because I was one of the first people to respond to the Blake Transit Center incident. I'm close friends with Kaim and his family. Honestly, I'm super frustrated. It's been 9 months.
Yeah.
They don't know anything of what's going on. They didn't know this meeting was happening. I found out today that this was on the agenda, and I'm super sick. But I came anyway because I think it's really important. So to hear that it's going to get pushed off for when the task force or when the commission comes is super frustrating. I also work with the houseless community here, and they are trespassed constantly.
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
So-
which community you, homeless? Okay.
Homeless. So the idea of changing a form really sounds meaningless to me, to be honest. Can you investigate and publicize data on when, where, and why these trespasses are occurring? Can you find out why these locations? Can you educate these locations and the people who are managing them about not making racist calls, trying to kick people of color and houseless people and people with disabilities off their property? That gets more to the root cause of what's going on here than changing some wording on a form. So another thing that we've heard a lot in the task force is that white people in this community are making all kinds of racist calls to the police, and this falls directly under that purview. It's completely heinous to me that a private property owner who's an elite, wealthy person in this community can call the cops and kick someone out for the bare minimum. They're just behaving poorly. No one is being harmed in these situations. Someone is houseless and they're trying to seek shelter and they're getting trespassed. It's completely ridiculous. And so I just want to urge you to do something more than change the wording on a form and to not wait. Please contact Kaim's family. They want to know that people care. I can connect you to the houseless community here, and you can talk to people who've been trespassed. So please reach out to me. I'll email you all tonight with my information. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Is this yours?
Hi again. It's good to see many of you after such a long respite. My name is Sergeant Donovan Smith. I'm a graduate student. I live in the 48104 zip code, and I'm a community organizer. And I want to speak about a couple anecdotes kind of related to this. So I was in the police task force meeting last night, which, to be honest, I really share some of Vivian's frustrations about cultural competency. The meetings themselves are very frustrating, in part because a number of the task force members are simply not prepared to engage with a diverse group of community members and with the real needs of the community. And the example I would give tonight, which is super important, is that intersectionality is a key analytic term in a lot of these conversations, and the way you used it actually was incorrect, and it reflects a lack of awareness about some of these issues. Intersectionality is a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, who's a theorist and a scholar and an activist. It's an analytic sensibility, a way of thinking about identity and its relationship to power. That's the key part of the term. Originally articulated on behalf of Black women, the term brought to light the invisibility of many constituents within groups that claim them as members. But it often fails to represent them. Intersectional erasures are not just exclusive to Black women, people of color within LGBTQ movements, girls of color in the fight against school-to-prison pipeline, women within immigration movements, trans women within feminist movements, and people with disabilities fighting police abuse all face vulnerabilities that reflect the intersections of race, sexism, class oppression, transphobia, ableism, and more. Intersectionality has given many advocates a way to frame their circumstances and to fight for their visibility and inclusion. It has to do with the overlapping ways that people are oppressed, not just an overlapping group, like institutions and where they cross. So I think it's super important, and I actually was disappointed to see 3 white members of the commission kind of seeming to argue against that instead of taking on the task of doing the work and saying it's critical we understand how to talk to community members. and we don't know enough, and we should put at the front of our agenda knowing as much as possible. There's simply no way to engage with voiceless community members if you don't actually do the work up front to understand what some of these issues are. And it was frustrating to watch how much the three of you argued against Vivian instead of saying, can we find a way to do these two things? And of course it's important, and as white members of the commission, we want to be the ones pushing as hard as possible to make sure we know at least the bare minimum for our community. So I would say that tonight was disappointing in that respect, but I think you can do more. I think it's critically important. As a white person who's doing this work for myself, and I think there are lots of people in the community that would engage, come and lead workshops, participate in that, and it would be incredibly valuable if you put in that work. So when I left the meeting last night, one of the most important insights from the meeting was a young black man, a member of the task force, and he said that the second problem behind police in Ann Arbor were racist white people calling police on black people. He said that was second to police, that one of the reasons why police are so bad is because white people are calling them all the time, that he is regularly policed in his neighborhood, near his home. He is constantly pulled over because people call the police on him. The trespass is a part of that system. Putting something on the form seeks to legitimize that system. It is exactly the opposite of what you claim. It is dangerous. I would agree as a first step to have it there in the case that the form can't be changed. People should know at least they can call the HRC. But to participate in legitimizing it without asking how this power is working on people, how it's oppressing them and harming them, is abdicating your responsibility as part of the commission. That's the task you should be taking up. What's the harm being done and what are we doing to fight it? None of you have said anything about that. You're worried about the procedural aspects of this. You're not even that interested in hearing from community members. You should be asking first who's being harmed and how, and what they can teach me about these systems of power and how they're acting in my community. When I left the meeting last night, I went to get a drink with a friend. I don't remember the street actually. We were sitting outside in the patio. There weren't that many people on the street. And a young black man came over to us. We was in a closed patio and asked us for change. We said kindly that we didn't have any, which was true, and he walked away. The waitress saw from the window, immediately came out, started to talk to us. Is he bothering you? He can't bother you. You can tell him to move away. He can't be near you. And I said, is the sidewalk your property? And she said, no, but this enclosed area is. And I said, is this a policy at the restaurant? Can we speak to the manager? The manager came out. Two managers came out. One was a white man, one was a woman of color. We had a really interesting conversation with them where we said, as two white women, we can't just be emboldened to tell black people to move away, to step away from property. That's what the trespass does. The Michigan law says, like most laws in the United States, you can't come on someone's property. The trespass citation says essentially that the police are deputized on behalf of property to fuck with people all over the city. That's what's at stake. When we were leaving to go when I was leaving to go to MSU, to protest against Richard Spencer's arrival, we had to stop in the parking lot outside the library because 6 police cars were swarming a man and they were arresting him for trespassing on a trespass. There are people in Ann Arbor who are probably locked in an endless cycle of being trespassed everywhere. I've bumped into people on the street asking for money, then they admit that they can't go anywhere because they are trespassed. They use it as a verb to describe their beingness in the city. Changing a form, reducing the fine won't change that. It's a system of policing people's bodies so that Ann Arbor looks clean and palatable to the university, to the business owners, to the institutions. You shouldn't participate in making that better, in washing that over and cleaning that up. You should ask why and how it's happening and who's involved. The agents on that form, that's concerning. Who are the agents? Police officers who work part-time for private. Most of these entities, Blake Transit Center is a service, it's a public service. It's not a hotel, it's not a restaurant. This is worse than Starbucks in Philadelphia. Okay. It's not a private business with a concerned white woman calling the police. It's the entire infrastructure of the city mobilized to quietly move people out of visibility. It's not even put on the police markers of arrests in the city because it doesn't count as an arrest. So when I went to look for the incident we saw outside of the library, I couldn't find it anywhere. It doesn't exist. This is huge. This will be huge for the task force if it takes it up, and it should be huge for all of you. If your job is human rights abuse, you're sitting on a pile of it. It's a massive scandal. It's not a form. It's not a few people. It's entirely how people's bodies are controlled in the city you live in and that you seek to serve. And you should start by getting training. And then if your job is to fight on behalf of citizens of the city, you should take up this fight and really find out what is involved. And that should start with asking residents who are trespassed to come and talk to you.
That's enough. We've got it. We have about 4 minutes, and we need to decide what the next step on this is. Any thoughts?
I think that given that we have 4 minutes, the only next step we can have is to talk about it at the next meeting, right? I don't know that we're going to come to meaningful decisions within the next 4 minutes, but I do know that I still want to invite the community to speak about this in a way that gives them enough time to actually participate meaningfully.
Okay.
At minimum,
else?
can somebody agree to be the liaison to hear from the family impacted by the trespass at Lake
I can agree to do
Transit
that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Does everybody agree that we should hear her?
Sure, and anybody else,
No.
you know, if you have other people who want to come and speak, that would be wonderful. Public comments, invite them. Next meeting, July.
For public comment? Is that what
Sure.
you?
Yeah.
I reiterate my previous statement that anything that we are engaging in should be posted publicly. And I think, Vivian, you lead that effort, so if you could please post it so that it is publicly known prior to the meeting to give people sufficient time to make the decision to come. And I just want to respond briefly to your comments. You didn't have the privilege of being at our last meeting, but a lot of what you spoke about, we did address, specifically to the interim police chief, and we have asked for information that we are waiting to receive, specifically the 300-plus individuals who are trespassed. We've asked for that documentation, and even prior to our last meeting, Vivian, Leslie, Linda, and I met with an assistant city attorney, asked her for information as it relates to trespass. So while we are talking about one methodology to address this, it by no means is the only effort that we are engaging in to address this very serious concern. So I guess in a kind but gentle way, I'm issuing a gentle rebuke of what you have said, because I take exception to the fact that this is all that we've done, when it is not. And it is ongoing, and it is something that we are concerned about, and we will continue to address it.
My apologies. I was responding to what I felt were a number of members who seemed like they just wanted to change the form.
Right.
But I absolutely agree. I do not mean to erase the work you're doing and or speak out of turn, so I appreciate the feedback.
But also, can that be made more public somehow?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. We have a methodology in place. Individually, I will share this, I participate in race dialogues. There are sessions that are 8 weeks in length, and I personally share some of this information without divulging any confidences therein. What I have been told personally in other venues subsequent to this commission and work is that people watch these sessions very carefully, because I have been told on numerous occasions, Pam, I saw you. So, in fact, I was surprised that the individuals who said that were even aware, because I haven't publicly stated that either in a personal or public manner, but I have been told that there are individuals who watch this. So while this is probably the most widespread way that we can communicate to the public, it by no means is the only way that we are engaging in that effort. But yes, we will do what we can to publicize the information.
I think unfortunately something that happened too is at the last meeting when we did talk with interim chief Fairness, that we didn't know beforehand that he would be attending that meeting or talking to us or engaging in that dialogue, so we didn't have prior notice. I think if we had known beforehand, that's absolutely information we'd like to share, because we learned a lot at that meeting, and I'm sure people would have had questions for him, but we didn't have that sort of prior notice. But he did speak to some of the questions, did give us some demographic data. But for example, he did mention that since the demographics they take might repeat individuals, that he didn't know whether or not some demographics were represented higher than others because it's the same person over and over again. Or, for example, he said that demographic data is hard to take down. So, for example, he could say that, a certain amount were white men, and we asked for what's the demographic of minority men, right? Or what's the demographic for minorities, and that doesn't exist because they only got the data for white men specifically, right? And questions like here we've identified which internal procedure, like it's rule whatever, right? This is the rule that we use to address trespass, and when we asked to see that rule, we were informed, like I'm texting someone right now to see if I can release that information, and we haven't heard back, right? So like if that information had been known to us, like I'm sure like people would have been interested, and I really wish we had been able to tell people about that. But some of that information at least exists in the video for our prior meeting, and so that might be interesting viewing for people. Yeah, and it's really unfortunate how that played out, but I do think it's really important to give the community a chance to let us know what their thoughts are, because I think the point of view of people who are actually red trespass is probably the most fundamentally important in guiding where we go from here.
Can I ask a favor, although I would hope that it involves the least amount of labor possible, because I really appreciate what you all are doing. But I think that some of these challenges would be very helpful to the task force. And one of the frustrations in the meeting last night, and Sumi and Vivian were there, is that the task force members have a little bit too much of a blank slate, a belief that they're starting on good footing with the police in the city, and everything is going to go as planned and everything's forthcoming. They really have a lot of knowledge gaps about how frustrating the process has been for many people, including members of the HRC, getting information. And I think even if you couldn't come to the meetings, if there was some written statement from the HRC about some of these key issues that you've been trying to address and the roadblocks you've been facing, it would be extremely helpful. The task force meeting started on a very poor note because a lot of the new members sort of expect things to go well, and community members repeatedly feel like they have to explain over and over again how recalcitrant the city has been, how the city administrator and the police have not been giving information for years. So I think that you all could play a critical role in kind of educating the task force about some of these key issues. But I would hate to ask you to do more. So maybe some kind of written communication if you all can't attend, although Vivian and...
Well, the task force is videoed, and it is available from CTN.
Yeah, but I think what she's saying too is that she would like input from us to the task force. So not us just being aware of what the task force is doing, but us also answering responding to some of those things.
Not to reinvent the wheel, right? I mean that because we have, and I think if I may butt in here, I think it might be a good idea that the Human Rights Commission, and I guess Leslie, one of you, or Vivian as co-chair, one of you, actually writes to the police chief, interim police chief, Mr. Chief Farnes, who was here, and we did have her, and we'll take them at face value. I mean, they want to be cooperative, they want to improve. I mean, we're going to take it at face value and ask him. I mean, we're not asking for names, ages, that's not it. But it would be great to have whatever statistics they have. I mean, if they can put it on a spreadsheet and send it to us. I mean, if there were 300 trespassers, was 200 at Blake. I mean, that in itself for me shows a lot of demographics. I mean, people, yes?
Can I add to that? I think that people are being arrested after they trespass again, so it would be important to know who is then arrested for something else, for disorderly conduct, whatever, where they've been trespassed from the space, because that's what we observed.
That's exactly what, that's what
But I'm not sure
meeting is
they were
about.
getting another trespass. They were being put in handcuffs into a police car.
Also, they're being trespassed and then arrested?
And then trespassed.
Yeah, so
and
like
then arrested, and it's unclear the process, but I think there are people, it's just a revolving door.
Yeah.
And what Amber was told was the young man was gonna be booked and released. It's like a catch and, so I think it's worth asking them what goes beyond it. What happens when someone has a trespass and then walks onto the property?
So yeah, so like I think that it really is unfortunate that members of the public weren't involved in the last meeting, because it was like very explanatory and very like introductory about like this is what informational trespass is, what is to be red trespass, and how that can convert it to criminal trespass, which is like a misdemeanor charge, and what the interaction between those two are, which I think could explain a little bit of like what you're seeing. And I'm really sorry to just say like, please watch the video, but unfortunately there was a lot of complexity there, and I think it would be educational if you're interested in it.
Thank you.
I think it's time to end. Vivian, you will take responsibility for.
Yes, for contacting Kaim's family, if you could follow up, I would appreciate it.
I have just a quick question, and that is, since we're going to ideally address this at our next meeting, would one of us, and I'm happy to follow up, see if we can get the information we requested at the last meeting of Interim Chief Fannis and previously Attorney Slay? Because the information that I've heard the audience participants speak to is exactly what we've asked for.
Okay. Would you mind drafting it and passing it by us?
Sure. But for example, I think that, so the first draft of our trespass letter was something that you and Linda brought to, I think, Forsberg, Deputy Chief Forsberg and Attorney Slay, and the rest of the commission wasn't present for the meeting, and I don't think detailed notes exist. So I don't know what was communicated to you or what we learned that we didn't learn at our previous meeting, and to the extent information like that was passed on to you.
You
that
have
might,
it all.
We have it all.
Yes, but we did ask information, we asked information of Baird, we asked information from Fannis, and there's some resistance, but if we have it written down, perhaps we can do a little bit better. And if we get Sumi and Graydon to help us,
Absolutely.
okay? Because they will respond to you also, and the more the better.
Absolutely, and since this police task force is happening and both of them are there, the chief and the deputy chief are there, and so I think this would be kind of a gesture of good faith that we are transforming.
Okay. I guess we are looking for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. We've got a little bit of homework to do. And we'll be back. Thank you so much.
When